So in today's video, we're going to be looking at the book Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. So if you look at people throughout history that are considered the great achievers, like Leonardo Da Vinci, Mozart, Napoleon, or today someone like Elon Musk, the one thing that they all have in common is their ability to manage themselves. What this essentially means is that because each one of us is different, we have to make sure that we completely understand ourselves and live our lives according to our strengths and not somebody else's. This is the only way in which we can bring the most value possible to the world and have the best chances of success in our personal lives. The author says the reason for that is that we can never build our greatness on our weaknesses, only on the things that we're already at least a little bit above average. The problem that most of us face is that we never really find out what our unique talents and gifts are. The reason for that is that our environment usually tries to point out our weaknesses, like in school, where you, in general, have to spend a lot of time on classes that you're not talented in. For example, studying harder for a test or tutoring after school, instead of spending more time further improving in the subjects that you're naturally good at. Another example are commercials that always try to point out the things that you suck at or need to have in order to be happy and normal like everybody else, which obviously just has the goal of making money on your insecurities. But even worse is that we quite often stand in our own ways as well, like the math genius who thinks that it's his duty to lack any type of social skills just to feed an old stereotype, or the talented athlete who thinks that he needs to struggle academically because that's just how athletes are. In that way, we never give ourselves permission to discover hidden strengths and abilities that could lead to greater opportunities and success in the future. Now, in order to really get to know ourselves, we have to do something called feedback analysis, as Peter Drucker describes in the book. So, what you do is you set a certain goal for a period of around 9 to 12 months, and by the end of it, you compare the results to your expectations. You actually have to write down your expectations. Now what this does is, it shows you how good you are already in a particular area, and if there's any chance for you to become a master at it, and what you would need to do to become great at it. With this method, you can discover your strengths and weaknesses in a matter of 2 to 3 years, which will serve you well, a great return on investment for the rest of your life. But Drucker explains that's not the only way to know our talents. We also need to learn how we perform and learn most effectively. For example, you might find out that you need to read about things in order to understand them the best. Others will find that they need to listen. And there are a few other ways, like talking to yourself, taking notes, or learning by doing. You just have to be more self-aware, and you can do this by feedback analysis. The problem with the big systems today, like the school system for example, is that everything is generalized and only applies to a small group of people. The rest are forced to function in ways that go against their natural inclinations, and therefore give them a lot of disadvantages in their day-to-day life, and do not let them perform in the best of their abilities. As Peter Drucker writes, do not try to change yourself, you are unlikely to succeed. But work hard to improve the way that you actually perform, and try not to take your work that you cannot perform, or that you will only perform poorly. I love this quote. The next thing Drucker suggests after you identified your strengths is tying them into your values instead of what a lot of people do, going against them. He himself, for example, was working as a successful investment banker in London in the 1930s, and even though he was making plenty of money in very unstable times, he decided to quit with no prospect of any other job in order to become a writer, as that was what he truly saw himself as. Being an investment banker, his strengths did not align with his values, so he followed his heart and went on to a path where two things could merge with each other. He chose the thing with which he thought he could make the biggest contribution possible to mankind. The possibility of asking yourself what contribution you can make to the world is relatively new and contains freedom that can often overwhelm us. Throughout history up until this point, from the day that you were born, you knew what your life was going to be about. If your family was a farmer, you were going to be a farmer like them. An artist like your parents or a monarch like your parents, you never had to decide what you wanted to do with your time on this earth. And obviously, it is an incredible luxury to be able to choose. We have amazing opportunity now. But we have to use the methods in this book to select the right path for us and to take our future into our own hands. Most people nowadays sort of wander around with no clear visions or goals, which is the absolute worst of all options. Not making a decision is also a decision. And with our lifespans massively increasing, it's often not enough to choose only one career in our lives. There's a reason for this thing called midlife crisis. It's our body telling us that we need new goals and challenges, which makes a lot of sense considering that people that used to live until the mid-30s are now able to well live into their 90s or above. We have amazing opportunity here. This book has all kinds of gold nuggets in it, and it's a pretty short book, but I highly recommend reading it. And if you don't read it, at least try feedback analysis. Write down on a piece of paper right now what you think you're good at and what your expectations for the future are 1 year from now. And then, 1 year from now, is what you wrote down actually happening or better, or is it worse? Because if it's worse, you might need to change what you're working on. Instead of writing it down, why don't you leave it in the comment below, and in a year, I will reply to all of you. Oh yeah, by the way, I think I mentioned this in the beginning of the video, but I have actually done this book review before. It was almost a year ago, and you can go back and watch that video. I'm going to put it in the end screen, and you can see how much I have improved in 1 year on this channel. In that video, there's a ton of more technical detail about this book, so I suggest you to go watch it, even though the quality wasn't near what it is now. I think you guys will get some amazing inspiration looking at where I was a year ago to where I got to now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you want more like this, subscribe. Hey, this is going to be an animated book review of the book Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker, which this is actually in the Harvard Business Review. And he says that after he has done this a few times, he realized that he's not always as good at what he thinks he's at. And he goes into, after you find a strength, you need to improve it. A little nugget of knowledge that he leaves in here is that, remember, ideas don't move mountains. Bulldozers move mountains.